Okay, thanks everybody for joining us today. For those who don't know me, I'm Darlene McLennan and I'm the manager of the Australian Disability Clearinghouse on Education and Training, ADCET for short. This webinar is being live captioned. You can activate those captions by clicking the CC button on the toolbar. It is located at the bottom or top of your screen. And we also have the captions available in a web browser. So we're putting the link into the chat now for you to get those in the browser. Before I begin, I just want to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from Lutchwidda, Tasmania, Aboriginal land, sea and waterways, and acknowledge with deep respect the traditional owners of this land, the Palawa people. The Palawa people belong to the oldest continuing culture in the world. They cared and protected country for thousands of years. They knew this land, they lived on the land, and they died on these lands. I wish to honour them. I acknowledge that it's a privilege to stand on country and to walk in the footsteps of those before us. I also want to pay my respects to elders past and present, and to the many Aboriginal people that did not make elder status, and to the Tasmanian Aboriginal community that continues to care for country. I invite you to add into the chat box which country or lands you are on today. And I want to acknowledge the custodians of all those lands, and also acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait peoples that are with us today. I stand for a future that proudly respects and acknowledges Aboriginal's perspective, culture, language and history, and a continued effort to fight for Aboriginal justice and rights, paving the way for a strong future. Okay, today's webinar, Scaffolding Students to Become Independent Learners and Career-Ready Graduates, showcases the work of Trobe University. Really excited, we held awards in May, which we called AccessAbility in Action Awards, which we put out across Australia, asking people to nominate themselves or teams or to nominate someone else or nominate other teams. And Trobe University was one of those winners of those awards. We're putting a link in now to the actual award session that we held. If you haven't watched it, I really encourage you to take the time to watch those awards. They were very powerful, not just focusing on the great work that exists, which is including the Trobe University work, but also some other fabulous work and individuals across the sector. It was heartfelt and an amazing session. So I encourage you all to take the time to watch that. So today, as I said, we're going to hear from Trobe University's Accessibility and Inclusion team. We're getting to hear from Julie Kiroluch, who is the team leader of that team. She will talk to us about the work that they've undertaken to assist students to successfully have control of the supports that they receive in a way that creates capable, independent learners and graduates with the skills to successfully enter the workforce. Before I hand over to Julie, just a couple of more housekeeping details. This webinar is being live captioned by Bradley Reporting and will be recorded. The recording will be available on ADCET in the coming days. If you have any difficulties today, please email us at admin@adcet.edu. Julie's going to talk to us for about 40 to 50 minutes, and then we'll provide an opportunity to ask some questions. So if you want to ask Julie a question at the end, please put that into the Q&A box. There we have the opportunity for people to upvote it by clicking on the thumbs up. So then I can get to the questions at the top of there. But if you're wanting to chat with each other, make comments throughout the session, please use the chat box to undertake to do that. So that's, we won't be monitoring that as much, but it's great to have a conversation with each of us in the sector. All right, well, I've gone on far too long, I think. So I'm going to hand over to you now, Julie. Really looking forward to hearing your presentation. And yeah, thank you very much for presenting, and we'll chat at the end.
Thanks, Darlene. Welcome, everybody. I don't know how many people are out there, and that's probably a good thing. Just to let you know about me, as Darlene said, I'm the team leader now of the Accessibility and Inclusion team at La Trobe University. I'm based at the Bendigo campus. I've been at La Trobe for a little over 10 years, working in this role or as an advisor all that time. Darlene, that was one of the best acknowledgements of country I have ever heard. And I just wanted to add my own acknowledgement that I'm coming to you from the Bendigo campus, which is situated on Jarrah country, the traditional land of the Dja Dja Wurrung people. I wish to pay my respect to the Dja Dja Wurrung community, the ongoing custodians of the land, and their elders past, present, and emerging. I acknowledge their unique cultural and spiritual relationships to the land and their rich contribution to society. Just to provide a bit of context, I plan to talk about the things that we used to do here at La Trobe and how we're moving towards a different way of working with our students to scaffold them in their journey through university. Hopefully this will resonate with some of you as you're moving through similar changes at your institutions. And perhaps for others, it'll pique some interest about the possibilities for the way that you work. And I look forward to some conversation at the end of my presentation. I'm going to start off by asking you to do a little poll, which Jane will put up for me. And the poll asks, which of these student supports are provided by your organisation? So your options are learning access plans or similar, note takers, alternative formats, transcripts, and captions. So you'll be able to choose any or all of those. I feel that most universities and higher education organisations will be offering at least some of those. And I just wanted to start by getting a sense of where we are all currently at. So Jane will finish that poll shortly and put up the numbers for us. And okay, so 93% are using learning access plans or similar. 75% are providing note takers. 77% are providing some form of alternative formats. 75% are providing transcripts, and 82% are providing captions. So they're really high figures all around. We're all doing a lot of that. Thanks, Jane, for running that. Okay, so I wanted to talk now about the previous things that we were doing, which is pretty much over the last 2 or 3 years. And this whole talk, I guess, was prompted by the chatter that was happening on the Ofsted list about what people were doing. How are you managing this at your institute? How are you managing that? And I feel that what we were doing was not very dissimilar to what other people were doing. So we have learning access plans. These tended to focus in terms of the language that was used on what students couldn't do. and they recommended what students should be allowed to do instead. And historically, there was little thought about skill development, even when we were renewing these learning access plans or LAPs for existing students. We also provided note takers, as we saw a lot of people do. And again, we tended to routinely offer note takers to students who might have a vision impairment, hearing difficulties, learning cognitive difficulties, often for the duration of the study. So if you got a note taker in first year, that would probably roll over every year. And then at La Trobe, I'm aware that we were really lucky to have our own Inclusive Resource Development, or IRD, team. They managed all of our alternative formatting, transcripts and captions using a combination of predominantly in-house as well as external services. So I'm going to talk more about each of these areas in turn. So with note takers, I'm going back to 2019, which was the last time that note takers were offered extensively here at La Trobe. So advisors would identify the need for note taker support, and then we would tell our wonderful admin team. We were lucky. We had somebody working about 0.8, 4 days a week in Bundoora, coordinating note taker support, and somebody at Bendigo who handled Bendigo and our other smaller regional campuses. And they've said that they probably spent the equivalent of a day a week doing this. So they would do everything from advertising, recruiting, organising pays, signing the note takers up, explaining the terms and conditions, the responsibilities, making sure they brought their pay sheets in, and then working with note takers when they would notify them and say, I can't come in today, or students who would say, I'm not going to be there today. So they did a lot. During 2019, there were about 38 students getting note takers, which was about 2% of the students who were registered with accessibility. And there were about 49 note takers being coordinated to support those students. Our Inclusive Resource Development team, as I said, I think La Trobe was extremely lucky to have a devoted team to provide this service. And in preparation for this talk, I had a really good chat with one of the people from that area. So I'm quoting him, so hopefully I get it right. So as advisors, we would identify that a student was going to need some sort of alternative format support, and we would complete an email template and submit that to IRD. Within IRD, there was a senior liaison officer whose role was then to contact the students and get more details about what they needed. So that was a full-time role. They would then start collating all of the work that needed to be formatted. So they would either scan textbooks, look for recordings, videos, download electronic versions that were available on our LMS or if needed, go to the publisher to request a copy of the text. Then IRD would set about converting the material. So they would use a program called OmniPage to create what they referred to as a pre-formatted Word document. Formatters, so staff, would go through that and correct errors, add tags, and make necessary changes, such as to the font. Transcripts were outsourced, and they could take between 1 and 7 days, depending on their priority level or their tier. A later addition to the service was CAPTIONS, which were facilitated through the library. So once all of this material was organised, it was exported according to what the student needed. So students had a profile and they had an online index where they would go to find all of their work. So it was an extremely complicated process. It involved a lot of people, between 5 full-time and 10 casual employees at any one point of time. In 2019, there were 60 plus referrals to IRD. And one of the things about this process, fantastic as it was it took time. So it took time from us identifying that a student needed support, to the material being sourced, the material being converted, and the material going back to the students. So we've changed our practice a bit since those days, or we're still changing it really. So I wanted to reflect on what's changed for us that has led us to alter what we're doing. So the university itself has expanded its focus from education to employability. And I have a quote here from the La Trobe Strategic Plan 2020-2030. We aim to educate students for life and for a good career. The latter is obviously becoming increasingly important as the competition for employment intensifies. Our goal is to produce some of the most employable graduates in the country, people with the skills and capabilities necessary for long-term career success anywhere in the world. So this was a move for the university. Another thing that happened for us in accessibility was we got a new manager. So Anthony Gartner came on board to lead our team, and he brought with him, as you would expect, lots of new ideas, lots of great ideas. And one of them was reflecting on this notion of employability, was that this applied to our students at least as much, if not more so, than the rest of the student cohort. And this was a big change for us, to move from not just thinking about how to help our students get through their degree, but how to make sure they could move into the workforce afterwards. We had, as I suspect many of you did, not one, but 2 transformation processes at La Trobe, one just for our area and then one for the whole university. And that saw a lot of changes, one of which was the dissolution of inclusive resource development as a standalone team. The good thing was that 2 members of that team came over and joined Accessibility. So we're very fortunate that they are with us now. And we had changes to the staff within our team. So we had some staff who chose to leave during the transformation process, which meant that we got new staff members who weren't used to doing things a certain way and were not just happy to look at new options, but actually thought of new options. So we had new staff members bringing new life to what we were doing. The other thing that happened that led to a lot of change was COVID. COVID meant that we had to change our supports at the whole of university and at the department level. Students were studying online, which meant they needed different supports. Academics were teaching online. The other thing was, though, and you will have noticed that because of COVID, there were rapid changes in the sorts of technology available and the sorts of technology being used. So this led us to reflect on whether or not we were really helping our students. We may tend to make decisions on students' behalf as to what they need to be accessible, erring on the side of focusing on what the students can't do. And speaking for myself, we can inadvertently project our own expectations and beliefs of what students will and won't be able to do on their own. So as I mentioned earlier, we would offer note takers without maybe asking the student, or we would offer them in a way that sort of said, oh, we'll give you note takers, you want note takers will be great. So that's what I've just said. We'd preempt the students by offering those supports, and we wouldn't look necessarily at other options, especially not assistive technology, and certainly not in the way that we do now. So what this meant was that we were perhaps propping up our students rather than scaffolding them to become independent learners and workers of the future. So let's have a look at this notion of support versus scaffolding. The term scaffolding, as most of you would know, originated from construction and refers to a temporary structure that's built for builders to stand on while they're doing things like putting up new walls and things around buildings. In 1976, scaffolding was applied in the context of learning, for learning a new concept or a new skill. So it was found that students who were scaffolded were better able to learn and to use that knowledge independently. So I've got an image here of an old brick house being literally propped up with great big beams to stop it from falling over. And then we move to an image of an older house that's being restored or fixed with scaffolds around it, but it's still standing up independently. So we can see that scaffolding has been used to assist students to learn for a long time. The question is, are we scaffolding students with disabilities to help them develop their independence as learners? And can we do it better? So what is the major scaffold allowing students to become independent learners and career-ready graduates at La Trobe? It's assistive technology. So this has been our huge change over the last couple of years. There's more assistive technology available, so that more things are now possible. During 2020, accessibility advisors worked with students to transition them from what they might have had, so note takers, for example, to using technology. And you will, some of you will be aware that this is when Sonocent started to be promoted for students to be able to manage their own note taking. And we were lucky, as I said, to gain 2 full-time staff from the previous Inclusive Resource Design department who became part of our team. And they were able to work with students so that they could actually gain confidence with the assistive technology, including, which I'll talk about, a dedicated site within Microsoft Teams. Those staff members have also been working with academics to assist them to change their practices, such as increased use of Teams, which facilitates easier recording and transcription, which allows students to manage their own needs. So accessibility and inclusion advisors and inclusive resource design officers are actively encouraging students to engage with assistive technology and explore what it can provide to them. So it's a conversation we have with most of our students now when they first come to see us. And we're even promoting assistive technology to prospective students. So we've been working here in Victoria with Spelled, which supports students with learning disabilities. And we've been talking to parents about upskilling their students before they come to university. And we're finding that students and staff are becoming champions for us. They're actively promoting the use of assistive technology. And then I mentioned that we are using Microsoft Teams. So those wonderful IRD staff had actually been using Teams for a long time in their department. And so when they came across to accessibility, they showed us how to use it before the uni was using it for a lot of its processes. So they were ahead of the game. They brought us on board really quickly, and we were able to put that to great use with each other and with students. So all of our meetings use Teams. And for a lot of them, we use recording, we use captions, we use transcriptions. I personally wear hearing aids. They've been playing up a bit lately, and I had to have a couple of meetings earlier this week where if they weren't on Teams and if I didn't have access to captions and transcriptions, I would have really struggled. And the university now is using Teams a lot for communication, which is great. But we have something special. We have an assistive tech channel within Teams where Stephen and Matthew, our IRD people, provide supports to all of our students. So there's a huge list. I don't know if you can read this, but there's a huge list of all the different types of technology that students might want to use. So text to speech, note-taking, captions, accessibility tools, magnifiers. It's a whole list. So students can go in. I refer to this as a like an annotated bibliography. Students can go in, look at all the apps in each area, and there are notes about where it's from, where to go to find it, will it be free or will it cost them money, is there a subscription, how does it actually work for them? So this is a great resource for our students. And then there are some chat channels within this assistive tech team. And there's a general chat, there's a staff communication chat for internal conversation, but the best one is the student chat. So students can go in, ask questions, and Matthew and Steve might respond to them, but so might other students. So those champions that I mentioned on the previous slide, they'll go in and make suggestions, and they'll support each other to find the best technology for their needs. They'll tell us about new technology they've heard about. And we're actually working now to see if we can make this channel available to all La Trobe students, because we believe that everybody should be using these resources to make studying easier. All right, what are we doing in terms of note takers and captions and transcripts nowadays? We've currently got 25 Glean licenses issued to our students. Nobody is using Sonocent anymore. That could be, but they've not chosen to. We've got 4 students having note taker support. So on the earlier slide, when I talked about 2019, it was 2% of our registered students having note takers. It's now 0.2%. And I believe all of those 4 students are students who've had note takers all along. So they just haven't been able to transition to anything else. Academic staff are encouraged and supported by Steve and Matthew to use Teams for recordings, transcripts, captions, and to use Stream for uploading. I think that should be recordings. No students are currently having formatting support. So we're not outsourcing any transcripts or captions. So students are assisted to use assistive technology such as Immersive Reader or document conversion to manage their own formatting supports. Something when I was talking with one of our IRD staff, Matthew, about this presentation, Matthew pointed out that new students coming to university tend to have no expectations about what they might or should get in terms of support. And a lot of them are really familiar with assistive technology. So they're really excited about using technology to manage their own supports and not have to wait those days and days that happened with that wonderful IRD team that we used to have, but things still took time. Now students are managing it for themselves, and that time element is less of a factor. Now I wanted to move on now to some feedback we've had from academics about blacks. And this is actually where I stole my term scaffolding from. Academics pointed out to us that lab recommendations can lead to students potentially not being ready to do things like go on placement. If we've said that an academic can't do group work or can't do presentations, and we've put that into their learning access plan, so the academics have never made the students do that, how do they know that the students are going to be able to manage placement, or what support they might need to manage placement? We know that our students need to be able to work in the real world, and that's certainly the message we get from our academics. And we know that in terms of our placement availability, it's becoming increasingly more difficult to source placements for any student, but especially for students who require adjustments. So this is causing us to rethink labs so that they also scaffold students to become independent, so that we're not doing, as I said earlier, putting in recommendations the first time we meet a student and not helping the student to reduce their dependency on those supports as they progress through uni. So I've called this slide a discussion, but it isn't really, because I'm asking you, I guess, to perhaps put some things in chat. I want you to think about students progressing through their university experience and through their management of their study as going from being a novice to someone with intermediate skills to someone who's proficient. I want you to think about ways that you might scaffold a student who might struggle with working in groups, who might struggle with doing presentations, who might have difficulty asking for assistance, and who might require feedback from educators when they're on placement, or need the really common one, the students who need frequent extensions, long extensions, repeat extensions. So how might we word our learning access plans so that we build in scaffolding for these students, not an everlasting support that doesn't change, as hopefully the students will change. I'll just leave that one with you. So what I want you to take away from my talk today is that changes to practice are possible. We can move students to assistive technology without compromising their learning. Students want to use assistive technology, especially when they're shown how and supported to gain the skills and competencies to do that. Students and staff can develop digital literacy, which they can then take with them. So particularly in reference to students, they will have that digital literacy when they enter the workforce. So we can develop independent learners and graduates who can manage their information in real time. And all this is about transferring power. So transferring the power of managing their study to students, and as they acquire more skills, removing the scaffolds that we put in when they start out. What are we thinking now? So here at La Trobe, there's still a huge focus on employability, creating graduates who can successfully move into their career of choice. And I'm quoting one of my team members here, who pointed out that the focus was once about ensuring students have a right to education. All right, that was a big thing, that we needed to make sure students could come to university and participate in the education process. Now we need to make sure that students also have access to employment opportunities, which means ensuring that we prepare them while they're here in education. And this is a change. Certainly a change for us here at La Trobe, certainly a change for me. You know, when I started 10 years ago, it was all about the student has a right to be here at university, student has a right to learn. Whether or not they get a job is not the point. Students still have a right to choose to work or not once they have graduated, but they also deserve to be prepared to work if that's their choice. As in prepared, I mean as in we need to prepare them. The university as a whole is measuring retention, progression and completion of students, and we're trying to measure how our students specifically are performing against those metrics. Is the support that we're providing improving those figures? This has been a huge paradigm shift for us in accessibility. We've had to revision what is a good service and acknowledge that empowering students and staff is actually superior to what we were doing before. So it's been a challenge, but I think all of our team, I know all of our team are so on board with this now, and really, really striving to not just embrace this move, but to assist our students to embrace it as well. So we've got a few projects. As I mentioned, our labs often focus on what students can't do. We want to make our labs strength-based. We want to build scaffolding into our labs, and we want to involve academics in the discussion around what labs could and should look like. And those discussions have already started, which is great. We need to do more with the use of Teams. All of our online student appointments, of which there are a lot, are done through Zoom. And this is a result of our booking system. It doesn't allow for Teams. And we would love to see Teams used for a lot more of our teaching. But EdTech is more comfortable with Zoom. Interestingly, when I was organising this webinar, I said, could we do this through Teams? But again, Zoom is a platform people know, and people know will work and will interact with other things. So not today, but maybe that will happen too. We're aware that a lot of material that's provided to students is an image PDF, which presents a challenge for text reading. So we're looking at ways of at least empowering students to modify that themselves and potentially working with academics so it's not presented in that format in the first place. And we'd like to do some research, as I mentioned. We want to look at the graduate outcomes of our student cohort. And we also want to speak with students who've transitioned away from something like NOTETAKERS to assistive technology. Talk to them about the challenges they've faced, how it worked for them, suggestions they might have as to how we can help students do that better. And may the thanks be with you. And special thanks to Matthew Sear and Steve Zelko, who are our IRD support people, and to Anthony Gartner, my manager.
I wasn't quite sure. You've got another slide, have you, or Julie, or that?
Yes, just a
yeah, I was waiting for that one before I jumped in. So thank you so much for that. That's absolutely brilliant. It was great to hear about the change and yeah, the processes to that change. Just a reminder, if people want to ask questions, if they could put that into the Q&A. We've had a couple that we can go through. So one was, can you discuss a little bit more about the Trobe's approach to creating the LAPs that are framed to emphasize developing strengths and proactive strategies, and what was needed to transition staff to this? And I know you've just started that journey, haven't you, really?
Yeah, so it is new. It's something we're aware of. We're actually going through some database changes as well. So the whole look and feel of LAPs may well change next year. But as I said, we've started meeting with academics to talk with them about how we can do this. And we had a really great conversation just this morning about that. And they've got some great ideas. And it will impact, so at La Trobe, once upon a time, all LAPs were done for 12 months. And now we're doing more long-term LAPs for conditions that are not likely to change. And that's a factor we need to consider, because if we try to build scaffolding, we either have to project the students' needs over the 3 or 4 years of their course, or meet with them more regularly to modify their lab. So it's a work in progress.
That's great. And look, it's just fabulous. I think sometimes, all too often, we just stick with the status quo of like, this is how we've always done it, and we don't stop and reflect. Is there a better way or a different way? And it's great to see the work and the thought that you're putting into the change, to changing this. So one of the other questions that we had was around, like, I know you talked about, you've looked at retention data and so forth, but have you evaluated or kind of sought advice from students about the change, and has it been positive? Well,
that's something that we want to do. So we've had anecdotal feedback as we continue to work with students. Some students have been very challenged by it, depending on their personal situation. So we do still have some students who are, for example, having note takers. But by and large, it's about the support that we can give them. So we don't just say there's this thing called Glean, go and look it up and use it. Or there's this thing called Immersive Reader, go and look it up and use it. We talk to them as advisors, and then if we need to, we organise appointments with our inclusive resource, Matthew and Steve, and they'll meet with the student, and they'll meet with them repeatedly. And then we have that channel where students can ask questions of Matthew and Steve and each other.
Yeah. Yeah, and what a great use of Teams. I was just having one of those reflective moments myself this morning about, I remember being, taken to Teams kicking and screaming, and now I just can't imagine living without it. So it is amazing to collaborate and to work with people. One of the questions we had, which it was about the use of smart pens in the part of the suite of technology or assistive technology that you have. Is smart pens still used? Are you using them at La Trobe?
I'm thinking. I know we have used them. If anyone in my team is,
yeah, I was just about to say Steve on there. You could actually add that to the chat.
It probably wouldn't be Steve. It would be one of the advisors who would know if any of their students are using them. I'm not aware of anyone using them now. And that may also be our current cohort, that we don't have anyone for whom that's the most appropriate support.
Yep. Okay. One other question was looking for some more examples of how you scaffold students, or work with students in that scaffolding approach, but also more around that struggle to meet deadlines. Is there any work that you've done around and working with students around, the challenges around deadlines, and especially if it's, time management is a part of the impact of your disability?
So we at La Trobe, we have student advisors, and we have what's called a learning hub. So we would often refer our students to those supports for skill development, I guess, to help them improve in those areas. We are having stricter deadlines imposed on us by the universities, so the capacity for students to have endless repeated extensions is being taken away. So I guess the conversation is changing with the student about the realities of trying to work within the imposed timelines. We talk to students about their study load. So often the best way to not need repeated extensions is not to study full time, which is a difficult conversation. Students don't like to hear that. But if they're not managing, that might be something we need to talk to them about. And we do have great academics who will go over and above to try and support students with extended timeframes. But at some point, I guess it's a question about like responsibility and duty of care. Are you really helping a student who's constantly having to push things out?
Yep. Excellent. Another question was in regards to the use of teams and that conversation and peer support in that Teams session around assistive technology. Are students keeping themselves anonymous, or are they, is it kind of identify themselves in that? I just wasn't quite sure. Probably in Teams you can't, can you?
No, so one of the things we tell students is that if they engage with that Teams channel, then their name will be out there. So there may be some students who don't engage for that reason. Yep. But as I said, we actually want to push it uni-wide. We want all students doing it, and then it's not seen as, like at the moment, if a student is chatting, then other students know that that student is also registered with accessibility for whatever reason. Whereas if it was being used by everybody, then there's no connotation there at all.
Yep. Okay. The other one is around your connections with the employability programs at La Trobe. Is there are you working in collaboration with that service?
Yeah, so we work with GradWise and with WDEA, WDEA. Don't ask me what that stands for. So GradWise is more metropolitan and WDEA is in the regions. So we refer students directly across to them.
Yeah. We've got another question here around captions and the errors that exist. And I know we often have that discussion in the sector of the percentage of errors that are allowed to make sure that you actually are meeting the accessibility requirements and that we're not putting ourselves at risk. Of a student complaint, how have the captions on videos gone, and the errors and the use of mics and so forth? Have you had any issues in regards to that auto captioning?
As somebody who at times relies on captions, I think the mics are extremely important. So I think that's a continuing space. It's an evolving space. So another program I really love is OTTR. So for a student who has either residual hearing or his hearing is okay, who might be using OTTR for other reasons. So for people who aren't familiar, OTTR basically transcribes everything that's happening in real time. And it will make errors, but it also provides you with an audio. So you can go back and listen to the audio. So if the word octopus appears in your text and you're pretty sure it wasn't meant to be octopus, you can go back and listen and correct it. But I've had students with hearing loss who've used not octopus, OTTR, really well, and almost never come back. Once I showed them that they were totally independent.
No, that's fine. I think you've covered that off. We just have two more quick questions. Just we're running out of time. One was, does La Trobe pay for all forms of AT that have been listed, assistive technology that was listed in that channel?
Okay, so if a lot of them are free. So Matthew and Steve do a great job of constantly looking at what technology is out there and updating it. If there is something, so for like Glean, if the advisor recommends it to a student, then we would reimburse them for the cost of it. So if whatever it is recommended by the advisor, yeah, we would cover the cost.
Somebody else, just a final question is that it's been a brilliant discussion, but they discuss about the challenge with minimal staff and huge caseload ratios. They're just asking around the AT, the assistive technology button in Teams is such a user-friendly team. Is it shareable, or have you intellectually propertyized it for La Trobe University?
I think the answer is no and no. We haven't intellectually propertyized it, if that word was, but I don't believe that other universities can jump in on our teams. Having said that, we are more than happy to talk about what we've done and how we've done it. I'm offering your services, Steve and Matthew, to share that with other universities. And I know there've already been conversations about how we do things now.
Right.
I know there are a lot of unis, or based on the tech conversation I've seen in Ofsted, people who are still doing it the very labour intensively way that we used to, and spending a little bit of time making your students independent then frees up a lot of your time down the track.
Yeah, the stuff. Yeah. Well, thank you, Julie. We've run out of time. I think if we had another 15 minutes, there'd be another 15 questions. Really appreciate your knowledge and sharing your wisdom. Also, thank you to Steve and Anthony, who have been in the chat box answering and providing some further information, which is absolutely wonderful. It's great to see the chat and the enthusiasm from the sector and from the La Trobe team as well. So yeah, great work. So glad we're able to award you with one of our accessibility awards, and it's wonderful to hear more about the project.
Thank you, and thanks to my team, who are fabulous and so great to work with. We're very
excellent. Thank you. Now, just before people sign off, we have got another webinar coming up, I think in the beginning of December. So the team will put that into the chat now. Words Matter, developing inclusive language guides in tertiary education settings. And that will be from Edith Cowan University to staff with personal lived experience and professional expertise. We'll talk about the importance of inclusive language in the tertiary education context. Which will be a fabulous webinar. We hope to have an announcement soon about some opportunities. We'll get to celebrate our 20th year. This is the 20th year of ADCET. So we're looking to kind of host a session or two around that and celebrate that with everybody in the sector. And everybody else, just, yeah, have a great rest of the week. We look forward to seeing you at our next event. And thank you once again, Julie, for your time, and to the captioner as well. Take care, everybody. Have a great day.
Bye.